Yep. So before we sort of get into the questions, I mean, the format is going to be pretty simple. I have some questions to just understand or like walk all of us through Saurabh's day-to-day life as a generalist. And then if we have enough time, we'll take up some more questions. And to introduce Saurabh, Saurabh is working as Chief of Staff at Haasyl. And I've had a conversation with him before, and his journey into Haasyl and how he found his niche is pretty interesting. And I'm pretty sure you're gonna have fun. So let's sort of get in the questions. Saurabh, do you want to say anything, add anything before we jump into the questions?
Nothing. Hi guys, I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah. Cool. So Saurabh, like I think the question right off the bat is, could you walk us through the journey of how you landed the role at Haasyl? Because that is one of the most interesting stories I've heard.
Right. Yeah. So a bit of context about myself and what Haasyl does. So Haasyl is a earned wage access provider where essentially what we do is we allow you to access your paycheck as and when you earn it. So in India, we follow 1 month pay cycle, right? So let's say you work for 10 days, we allow you to access your salary for 10 days. Why this is interesting is we go through the employer. So this essentially allows us to do credit score free lending. So all the lending that we've done till now has been without checking for credit score or any criterion, and we've got close to 100% repayments. So a bit about we currently are in beta stage where we're testing out with two companies. So that's about the company, and about me. I am currently a final year undergraduate at IIM Indore, where I'm doing a liberal arts degree. And one of the benefits of COVID-19 has been that we've spent the college time at home. So I had a lot of free time. So I joined Hostel in my second year. At the end of second year, I joined there as an intern of sorts, where the founder had just began Hustle. So we were helping him in product research, building a thesis, and so on. And so I joined as an intern, helped him do a bit of the research. And eventually, when the internship was coming to an end, he's like, you know what, you guys have been here since the beginning. You know the product. Why don't you come on part time as your college goes on? And let's see how it goes. So initially, I actually had a bit of rough patch because I couldn't find the areas that I liked. Then they put me onto UI UX design. I went into it because I remember that I met the co-founder of the startup for the first time, who's the engineering head. He saw my presentation on UI UX, and he's like, "So what college are you doing engineering from?" And I'm like, "I'm actually not a technical background person." So since then, I got my confidence. So once I was confident, the startup guys were also confident. Then I moved into product development, and then I think since then, whatever problems need to be solved, I'm there.
Right. And I remember like you sort of can you tell us how you found out about Hustle in the first place? You were doing some very interesting
Yeah.
gig with your friend, right?
So I and a couple of my friends, we were very bored. Right? Like COVID, agya, we had one. So we had this one group where we did this one analysis for something once, and then the group became inactive. And then you were like, you know what? I'm pretty sure no one has had this idea before. Why don't we go and do consulting for startups? And and then we all had a LinkedIn profile. We started approaching them. We had a lot of rejections, but then a lot of good conversations. Luckily, one startup, he told us, I think in January or February, Vishwa, that I might have an opportunity for you guys. Come back in 3 months. 3 months later, we messaged him, and he's like, just because you guys remember to message me in 3 months, come, I'll take you guys on board.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And now as a generalist, so what do you exactly do?
Right. So talking about what I do as a generalist, right? So I think the best part of my job is that if there's any fire that or any urgent need that comes up and that needs to be done on an urgent basis, I think I am the person that they usually go to. So I do projects. I work on a project to project basis. For example, if we say in this month the priority is raising say an angel round, then I'll be focusing more on building the deck and building the narrative. But if on 1 month you want to do consumer research, then I'll be doing the whole week. I'll spend making calls and then building a thesis on what the consumers think and what's the product. So that is there. Other than that, I think team building and communication has been an eye opener for me because before joining here, I used to think people will just talk and that's about it. But this time we have spent some time building culture, sharing articles on inside our groups, holding regular team meetings. I think I played an important part in that because I think one thing as a generalist is that you need to define your own role, right? So at all points in time, you need to know what's going on in a company. So I think that is there. But I think the best part I would say is that I talk with the CEO regularly. So because of that, what happens is that we catch up at least once in 2 days or every day for sure. So then we discuss what's happening in the company, and that's kind of like where you're able to brainstorm what's the path ahead. I think that's kind of the best part.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting, right? Actually getting to sort of talk it out with the CEO, brainstorm, throw ideas, and then you get to humanize the CEO. Normally, in normal situations, you think of the CEO or the top leaders as God. Like this is what they've said, this is what needs to happen. But they're pretty cool. And so like I remember you basically joined as an intern, right? So you briefly touched upon how you found your niche, or like you somewhat narrowed down what you do at the company, right? So can you like tell us
Yeah,
what the experience was like to find a place for yourself in the team?
yeah, sure. I think one thing that I like to mention right off the bat is that I also very lucky to have a founder like Vishwa, right? Because he allowed us to take our time, find a pace. So I think that was one of the things that we were very, like me and my friends were very lucky to do. So when I entered when we started the internship slash consultancy thing, I was brought in to do policy and policy research, which was, to be honest, interesting, but like became very boring after a point. And even he noticed that, and I noticed that. But initially, I had troubles communicating that. But then one day we had an honest chat, and he was like, "Boss, I can see that you're not enjoying this." And I'm like, "Yeah, is there something else you want to do?" We figured that I began with UI UX research that led to product, because product is what I'm enjoying right now. So I think that has been the journey where I think regularly communicating what I want to do and then just trying it out has been the way to go.
Right. I can like sense that usually like this is very important part of the culture where you actually get to have such an open conversation, because otherwise people get stuck in these loops for 6 months to an year, after which it leads to frustration actually. So
I've
like
been
being
there.
able,
So
yeah,
because one thing I realized is that we are scared to admit that I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, or what I don't know what I'm doing, and we prolong the like communicating that, thinking that we look dumb otherwise. But then the more you prolong, the longer it is to fix it after
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, that's pretty true. And I'm pretty sure, right, when you joined, then still unsure of where you fit in, but there would have been few things, a North Star that sort of made you take your next decisions, each like your next step at each point. What are the few things that sort of helped you decide that okay, this is the next thing you need to try, or don't need to give up. You can still find what you are really good at.
So I think in this so one caveat is that I joined a very early stage startup, right? I think uh, yeah.
It's just
So because I joined so early, in this case, my role was very undefined. So I think the most important process here is to have trust in the founder.
yeah.
I'm sorry, is there some disturbance?
Yeah, I think someone was trying to speak, but just a second. Just a second. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just repeat my answer. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think the most important North Star metric that I had was that, is my trust in the founder increasing day by day because of how much as I hear his vision, or is it like constant, is it reducing? Because the one thing that has been true from day one is that even if the product changes, even if we make a pivot one day, I'm fine with that because I believe that the founder is the right person. So I think that was there. I think one of the most toughest things that I learned is that when you're in an early stage startup, and when there's especially when you're a generalist whose role is not defined,
Yeah.
you always have an itch to do something, right? Like, what do I do? Let's make a deck, let's do something, let's mash it out. But sometimes it's the best thing you can do is you need to give it time, or you need to take a step back. And so I've learned to, sometimes there'll be days when you don't have a lot to do. So what you have to either find something to do, like I get into a lot of reading. So you have to be comfortable with that. And but I think if I had to sum it up, I would arguably say that the one thing that I always checked is, am I learning something new, or am I still just repeating process? For example, am I just making consumer support calls every day, or am I say working on developing a new survey through which I can gain new insights? So I think until now I've always felt like there's a lot more to do, a lot more to learn. So I think that's been my North Star metric.
Makes sense. And so usually when you say, right, what is the time period that you give to a task to decide, okay, now it's getting repetitive and you need to find something new? Like, do you have like a week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months? How long do you give it before you're like, okay, now I need to jump to something new?
I think arguably this question needs to be taken with a pinch of salt from my side, because we're just in the early stages of being live, right? So until now it's
Right.
been every stage like development. So uh, giving that caveat though, I think it depends on the task. So one thing that my founder and regularly do is, we have an insights call where instead of, even if we are doing say normal work, we try to drive insights from it. Like, what is it that we're learning from this? So if I notice from a process that the same insights are being derived again and again, I think that's when we decided, okay, now maybe I can try out in some other part of the work. And I think one more thing that my founder and I also have an agreement where he before I join full time once I graduate this May, he also wants me to go out in different verticals. So moment he feels that I can try something out new, he puts me out in other places.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And so like now on a timeline period, I can see uncertainty sort of becomes the best friend of a generalist. But do you have some kind of a structure to your day to day? Like usually, what does your day look like? Do you have fixed clock in, clock out hours? Do you have fixed hours? How do your days look like? Is there a rough structure to it?
Yeah, I think the rough structure is that I finally learned how to use Google Calendar properly. So I think that has helped a lot.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
when I
Google
first
Calendar.
joined, I didn't put my sync on my phone, the calendar never refreshed, and I used to miss a lot of meetings. But I think I've been allowed, so because we're a remote organization that works mostly asynchronously, I am allowed to choose how my days are set. So like if I have college classes during the day, I can work during the night. So that's there. And like that's on a day-to-day basis. Time is usually, I would say, 4 to 5 hours a day. And we mostly follow a task-based deadline, right? So if there are some tasks where we need it done quickly, I'll work more. But if there's some that can be done over a greater period of time, that is there. And I think most importantly, one thing that usually characterizes the end of the day is that like around every day at around 10:30 or 11 in the night, I have a half an hour chat with the founder where we just discuss how the day was, anything new, and I try to bring up any new articles that I've read or anything like that. So I think that sums up my day.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty interesting. Like ending your day each night talking to the founder. That's nice. And so like now, I think you've been a generalist. You've been working as a generalist for how long? A year plus? Or is
I
it?
would around like 9 months, I would say.
Got it, got it. So do you see yourself picking up a specialization anytime soon?
So I think one thing I'd mention about me is that I have also the program I'm pursuing at IIM Indore is a 5 year degree. So it's like a 3+2. So I'm planning on taking a break for a few years and then coming back for my MBA. So I think in that way, I think my path would be a little different since my MBA is already secured. So the roles I'm exploring are pre-MBA roles. But I think talking about whether I plan on specializing down the line, yeah, I think if I found some, so I think of generalizing as when you're managing everything, right? So I think that would be either as a founder of a startup or working a chief of staff role. I think if I decide to say start up on my own, definitely I will continue to be a generalist. But if I'm proceeding to work in some other startup, I think I'll definitely look to find my niche. I think there's an interesting article that I read on the internet that kind of I really resonated with this. The founder works with the chief of staffs on a 24-month period in which
Okay.
they're allowed to rotate into different verticals that allows them to gain like a proper exposure. Post which, based on what they like most, is where they go and specialize into.
Oh, that's pretty insightful to be honest. I think a lot of founders hiring chief of staff and generalists should go through this process because that makes sense. And so far in your journey, have you found yourself sort of finding any fancy to a particular domain, or has it been equal amounts of interest in every place?
No, I think I definitely enjoy doing product, like
Ah,
the cycle of development. I think that's something I enjoyed because that's when I learned a lot about tech. Like now I can read code, I can figure out, okay, like if the coders are cursing someone, I know why they're cursing them, or like
ah.
so I enjoy doing product. I also got frustrated a little bit because I had to communicate with a lot of people, but I think product is something I'm exploring. But other than that, corporate development, I think is something that we're also looking at, but I think that's much farther down the line.
Right. Yeah, this is like a very common theme I've seen in most generalists. Like learning is what drives us, right? Where we start feeling that okay, there's no learning, like shit, we need to sort of jump ship or like find something new. But this is something that I myself have personally faced a lot. But when you talk to your friends, right, career is a not just friends. I mean, career is a pretty common topic. That's like the first thing you discuss with someone new. Either it's a relative or a new friend that you make. It's like, what do you do? So how do you manage to explain your job?
So I think I have a actually so when I was so because I was at home for close to a year and a half because of COVID. My family has a tradition that we have to have dinner together every day. So when we're having dinner, this is obviously because of how my family is. We end up talking about jobs, careers a lot, and I think they can attest to the amount of changes. I think every 2 months I changed. Like I had a UPSC phase. I had a phase where I thought I'll definitely do a PhD. There were phases that I was pretty sure I'm going to do investment banking and nothing else.
Right,
So
right.
I think, but the one thing that was common then was that I was very sure that no, this is what I want to do. Like, oh, like ISA karna hai. But now I'm kind of accepted that maybe this, at least this 20 to 21 age that I'm in right now, I'm okay with exploring. So I'm actually keeping an open mind to what I want to do. But if I talk to my friends nowadays and they ask what I do, one, since it's a very early stage startup, half the time is spent explaining what we do. And I think that's kind of, I like it that way. But other than that, when they do ask me what I do, I say that I don't know, I just help solve problems and that's about it.
Yeah, that's a pretty apt description for a generalist, but I think like only generalists understand the depth of it. Other than like, what does this even mean? Uh, but and like moving on, so like in your experience, how fulfilling has this role been for you so far?
I think obviously I've had a lot of fun, right? Because I've been given a lot of leeway by the CEO to try out what I want at my own pace. And the only rule is that I should learn and I should share my learnings. Like we write a lot.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's been a lot of fun. Like honestly, like I still don't see it as work. Like that's one thing that I keep telling my, like obviously this will change once I move to full-time role. But until now I had a lot of fun. But obviously it's also been frustrating a few times because there have been times when we are doing nothing or like we are waiting,
Right.
just there's nothing we can do. But then now I kind of realized that no, I think that is something that we need to come to peace with.
Yeah. And so like now I think that the biggest thing about like being a generalist is there is just no structure for a really long time. And I think it's pretty new as a role itself. So people also take there's like a lot of societal aspects involved with it. And now I think we have most of the people who are here are generalist aspirants. And what would you sort of recommend to these? Like, do you have any recommendations for aspiring generalists to like find a right team, right? Because that is one of the biggest challenges. And once they find like a appropriate team, how do they sort of proceed into finding a more suitable or a more focused role at the organization?
Right. So one thing I like to actually disagree with you on is that I don't believe that the generalist position is a new thing. I think it's been there for ages. Like these management trainee programs that every company has, or like in the US, post a degree, there are people who work in any Fortune 500 companies. They keep
Okay.
switching industries. So I think the idea of a generalist has always been there. It's just that it's rehashed every 30 years into something new. I think consultants, so that, coming to the idea of how I think so. You do need to refine your search. Right? You can't just be like, I'll be a generalist at any company. So one thing is, I think identifying the sector you want to work in would help a lot because I think I identified early on that fintech is a space I want to be in because I feel like in India that is a space that's very creative and that's where real change is happening. So I think that way, even if so, what you're doing is since the work that you're doing is out of the equation, you have to look at like what work does the company do and how are the founders and how is the founding team. So if you identify the sectors you want to work in, that I think helps a lot. For example, the two areas that we looked at Haasyl were also ones that I liked were grocery and fintech. So because they aligned, that helped me come here. I think had this company been in some other sector, I probably would not have been as attracted as I was to this. Second is I think the team matters a lot because at this point I am learning as much as I am from the company as I am from the founder. In fact, I would argue that I'm learning a lot more from the founder. So
Right.
choosing the right set of people is also very important. And other than that, it's a lots of trial and error, right? As I mentioned, I also struggle a lot. So I think joining an early stage startup is the best, I think, possible way because if you're like I'm still a final year college student, right? Why was I given this opportunity is today I would still hang on as chief of staff against say someone older who comes in because I've been there for the whole product life cycle vis-a-vis someone who's coming in much later, even though say they may have more experience. So you need to find a wedge and find your way through. And that wedge might be anything like you might join as someone who's only there to say do UI UX design, but then you tell them to listen. It's not just design. I know the product logic that goes behind it. So then if you take initiative, especially in early stage startup where the founder has no time, you tell him, boss, I want to do this. He'll be like, yeah, do it because anything off his plate, he'll be happy. Sorry, they'll be happy to
Yeah.
accommodate that.
Yeah, this even I've noticed like I think initiative is the biggest like best way to sort of find some niche for yourself also because you get to experiment, but it comes down to how enthusiastic you are to try new things. And like, I don't think like the generous role is pretty hyped to an extent as well. I mean, like on Twitter, at least you see most folks, they're like, oh, okay, this is something new. So it's slowly trying to become the new PM. But in your opinion, like, who do you think should become like a generalist? Because I don't think everyone should. It's not a good or a bad thing, right? It's just that everyone's meant for really different kind of roles. But
Yeah, I think I realized that the space was saturated when I started getting LinkedIn ads every day for Chief of Staff Association. They're like, join the Chief of Staff Association, accelerate your learnings. But honestly, like the role is not as glamorous as it looks, right? So I think while it is a lot of fun because you get to choose what you do, it's also tough because you have to figure out what you want to do, and that can be frustrating. So, but honestly, it's actually a pretty good role for anyone who's, I think, anyone who's say beginning of their career, anyone who's still figuring out what to do. I think, or anyone who just wants to get in at a, they want to do much more than say an entry role level in a big organization where you have little impact. I think a generalist is a very good role for them. I think the traditional structure is that you do 2 years of consulting or IB and then you move as a chief of staff, right?
yeah, yeah.
So we broke down, like we sat down and figured out why is it that. So what consultants bring to the table is that they bring structured thinking. So anything, like they don't care what the problem is. They like, we'll put our frameworks, we'll give you a solution. So if you're a person who can think in frameworks, so because early stage, like when you're early stage startup, there are thousands of things going on and there's no process. Like you'll be doing everything on Excel or Google Sheets and Google Docs. So anywhere that you can bring in process, that's a good thing. So if you're a person who likes to think in a structured way and bring in processes, I think that's a plus. If you can do macro thinking, I think that's the biggest advantage because I'm getting, as a 20-year-old, I'm getting to sit with the founder and talk about the, obviously I do my research and that's what I bring to the table, but getting that chance itself is a big thing. So I think people who like to think macro is a second thing. People who take initiative, I think that's the biggest thing. If, because we've had a few people who left the organization, few people who were here, but we had to, initially they didn't enjoy it. But one thing we realized is that our culture as a company was that we like to take initiative, and especially because all of us are trying in this stage mostly doing general work, taking initiative is the most important part. And if you can create repeatable processes, like, so for example, like you notice that there are some, like if you're making informal PRDs, you take the initiative to set up formal ones that can be shared everywhere. So anywhere that you can create repeatable processes, I think if you fit these, I think you'll have a lot of fun.
Yeah, that pretty much that explains it really well. I don't think I would have put it any better than that. So like for me, most of the questions that I had have been covered. Like I too really enjoyed going through your journey once again. But I think the audience has few questions and we can start taking them. So folks, just raise your hand whoever wants to ask a question, and then I can unmute you and you can ask us the question. Agrim, do you want to like I can just a second, you can come on stage and ask your question. Okay, unless fine, it's fine. I can just so Agrim wants to know how to decide if MBA is right for you. Okay.
My
Saurabh.
parents made me write CAT, so I'm not sure myself. And I'm
Yeah,
already in an IM.
right. Yeah,
So I
not
think uh, an MBA, I would arguably say, is it depends on what stage. Like if you want to make your way in the corporate world, I would say that there are still a lot of companies that look at MBA as a prerequisite. So I think that if you want to work in that space, I think an MBA is a good thing. If you're looking for a career switch from a technical role to a non-technical role, I think that's also a good thing because a lot of engineers use MBA as a way to shift into say marketing or finance or consulting. So I think that's a good thing. But obviously, I think arguably that is the one side. I think the other side of the story is that now with the startup scene exploding so well, if you can just find a good startup to work at, then I
yeah.
think that I think would also be a good solution. I think it depends on your risk profile. If I would argue that MBA from a good college is a less riskier option, with obviously lesser the risk, lesser the reward as well. But if you decide to go for a startup, the risks are higher. But if you do it, I think the rewards, the learnings, and both everything else, I think is much higher in a startup.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree to that because the startups may you can also join. I mean, if you're from a tech background, you could always join in a technical role. But when you're working in a startup, literally everything is just ready to fall apart. And any initiative like Saurabh mentioned is always welcome. So you'll always have the opportunity to try out business ideas, business concepts to the team. And at the end of the day, that's what essentially an MBA tries to provide you, because there is a lot of theory for sure. It gives you structured thinking around business concepts, but a lot of that is available online also. MBA gives you a platform, it gives you a network, and it gives you like a easy break into the corporate ecosystem. But if startups is something that you want to stay in, MBA is not a prerequisite. I think like a lot of times I've seen few startups folks even dislike. I mean, once you get into MBA, right? I mean, they will sort of wire you in a certain way. So, and their salary expectation also rises drastically. So it doesn't very well suit like a early stage startup or like a unstructured startup, because MBAs come with like their frameworks.
But I think the one,
And
so I had this one conversation with a VC at a big VC now who was an early employee in housing.com, and he was an engineer who moved into doing sales and marketing. So I asked him, you made that switch and you had no experience, like how did you do it? He's like, if you can apply first principles thinking properly, I think that is more than enough. And I think
yeah.
MBA is just one way of teaching you first principles thinking.
Yeah, that's true. First principle thinking is a superpower. And I think Agrim had another question, how to decide if you should be a generalist or a niche player. I think somewhere down in the conversation it has been covered, but I think it just depends on whether you sort of, if you're not convinced that the niche that you have is something that really is something you really enjoy and you want to explore, that's when a generalist role comes into picture. And at the start of the career, you should usually always be a generalist if you have like the risk appetite given. But yeah, let me see. I'm not sure if there are any other questions. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we can conclude this very interesting conversation. Any tips for joining startups as a generalist, Saurabh?
Start writing content.
Yeah,
I think,
content. Yeah,
yeah, like I think start writing because you ideally what you will ideally be reaching out to found, at least if you're reaching out to very early stage startups, they're probably in stealth, so there's no way of finding them. I think AngelList is one great option. Obviously, I think more than LinkedIn or Twitter, I think AngelList is where you can find early stage startups. But I think in general, if you don't have any experience, I think writing, figuring out the space you want to be in. So if you know that you want to be in fintech, start writing on what's happening in fintech, because then when you approach the founder, you know what's happening in the space,
yeah,
and they also have a way of verifying that okay, you do it regularly. So I think that would be my one advice. Other than that, just reaching out and trying to have as many conversations as possible, I think is one more thing. I think those two sum it up.
yeah. And I think like from our last conversation, like it's a very luck-based thing, right? You have, it's like a chance encounter that you find like the right fit, but
But I think if
yeah,
you keep doing it, you do end up finding it, like
yeah, for sure.
honestly, because India hai, like ho jata hai kuch na
हाँ,
kuch.
हाँ, हाँ. I started out as a freelance writer for the startup I currently. Oh yeah, I had a very nice chat with Ankita as well. But
Oh, that's great.
yeah, she was telling me her story. This was also very fascinating. But yeah, content seems like I think like I also really enjoy writing content. I think Swapnil also took me on board because of the content itself. But
Yep.
okay, okay. Freya is saying I'm currently doing an MBA. I have a major interest in finance. So any project could look forward to. Okay, so Freya has like a strong interest in finance, and what kind of projects should she look should they look forward to going like what kind of projects should they look forward to doing to get into a startup? Interesting. So fintech, Mr. Fintech.
Okay. So I think it depends on what you want to do in finance. Like if you want to do finances for a startup, just approach a founder and be like, I'll do your, I don't know, tax, like just Excel modeling for a few days. If you like it, I can come on. I think that's what happened with us. Other than
Yeah.
that, I think if you mean in fintech product. I think knowing how this, like just knowing how India's stack works, knowing how say Brazil speaks, or sorry, Brazil speaks, or South Africa's M-Pesa. Just knowing the, I think if you know how what is happening in fintech, and then when people are open to having conversations, like if you reach out to most fintech founders nowadays, most of them respond. So reaching out to them, and they're all dying to hire you. Like if you have talent, I think this is the best time to be hired, because everyone's looking out for talent. So I think that should not
Yeah.
be that tough.
Yeah. I think it all comes down to initiative. And so, yeah, I mean, Freya, like Saurabh mentioned, I'm not sure if you've been hearing, but so basically, like, I think Twitter is usually something that works really well. Twitter and LinkedIn both is a place where you can sort of reach out to founders. And the best way is first to sort of understand what the startup does and try gauging where you could add value and just put forth that proposition. You should definitely watch. There are a lot of great videos on cold emailing, cold DMing, how to write really nice cold messages. And yeah, I'm not sure if there are any other questions because no one's raising their hands. They're just typing it in the chat. But cool. So do we have any other questions? Okay then. Cool. So Saurabh, thank you so much for doing this, and it was once again a lovely conversation. I hope to
Thank you.
stay in touch. We will stay in touch. I mean, want to see where life takes you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Do one thing, drop me your number and email. I'll text you or something.
For sure. Cool.
Chalo. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me,
Okay.
guys. Bye,
Yeah.
Swapnil. Bye, Ishaan.
Bye bye.